Hey buddies, today we are going to start with a new module or rather section B of your FMDA topic, and the name of the topic is Business Data Analytics. As we all know, this carries 20% weightage of your entire FMDA, and this is complete theory. So if you just prepare well, I guess you should be able to score 15 to 18 marks easily in the subject. Let's start with the topics. Let's start with 8.1, and this 8.1 talks about meaning, nature, properties, scope of data. Okay, the key word in this entire topic will be data, right? So what exactly is data? Now data is basically a raw alphanumeric values obtained through different acquisition methods, right? What are alphanumeric? Alphanumeric means it contains both numbers as well as the words. So that's how you defined alphanumeric, right? So any alphanumeric values which are obtained through different acquisition methods, right? Data that can be collected through various sources. So that's what you defined it as data. Now data in the simplest form consists of raw alphanumeric data or the raw alphanumeric values. Now what do you mean by raw data? Raw data simply means it can have text, numbers and symbols, but it may be meaningless, right? So for example, if you say number 2468, right, this is data, this is very raw in nature, but this on its own doesn't convey anything to you, right? So this becomes a raw data. Similarly, if you just simply say Nestle, Amul or ITC, this is again a raw data. This is something which, this is a data, but this doesn't tell you what exactly it's trying to indicate, right? Similarly, if you just look at this series of number, that is 36, 37, 38, 35, 36, this is simply number, as in there is some information that's being collected or some data that's being collected, but you don't know how to utilize it, so that becomes a raw data, right? So basically it is very practically difficult to decode what data series actually talks about. Data on its own cannot convey any information, right? So unless and until you have supporting information, in that case you will never get to know what data is trying to imply, right? Okay, so the first thing that we read about is data. Now we move on to something called as information, right? Now how do you correlate both data and information to find out something more substantial or something which is more relevant, right? Okay, what is information? Information is created when data are processed, organized or structured to provide context and meaning, right? So when you use this data to find out something which is more organized, processed and structured in nature, that provides something substantial or some relevant meaning to you, that becomes your information, right? So information, you can define this as a processed data. So data when processed, that will become information, right? So data is something which is very raw in nature. It may have no significance at all when it is looked at on its own, but when you talk about information is processed data. So when data is actually processed, that can be called as information. So we can say that information is equal to data plus the context, in what relevance it is being talked about, right? Now similar example we'll take. If we say 2468, previously it didn't have any meaning because it was simply raw in nature, right? But when you say 2468, then obviously you can sense that these are all even numbers, or we can even say it's a multiplication table of 2, right? So this information makes much more sense than only a raw data. Similarly, when I say Amul, Nestle or ITC, these basically are FMCG companies, that is fast moving consumer goods companies, and these basically are listed in NSE, that is the National Stock Exchange, right? So now you know that why this information is collected and how it can be utilized, right? Similarly, when I say 36, 37, 38, 35, so on and so forth, these basically indicates temperatures in Kolkata for the last 4 days, right? So you get to know that this information, what relevance does it carries, right? So we spoke about data, we spoke about information. So the next thing that we talk about is basically knowledge. Okay, now what do you mean in knowledge? Knowledge is what we know, right? Knowledge is needed to produce actionable information that can lead to impact, or rather we can say information is used for solving a problem, which indirectly means it is use of knowledge, right? So basically you have data, this data is being converted into information, and with the help of this information you gain something called as knowledge, right? So this is the chain of events, and this is what is being referred to, right? So you can simply say, what is the definition of knowledge in numerical terms? Now knowledge can be defined as information plus the application of it. So if you just look at this, the easier way to remember this is, data you just talk about meaningless text, numbers and symbols. If you move on, information becomes the previous one, that is data plus the context. And finally when you go to knowledge, knowledge is nothing but information plus application of it, that is application of knowledge, application of information, I'm sorry, right? So now you come to the same example, and we will see how this data and the information that we have collated before becomes knowledge for us. So we know that 2468 is basically multiplication table of 2, but that also does mean the table of 3 should start from 3. So that means none of these numbers will come in the table of 3, yes or no? So that's a knowledge for us. So whenever we talk, I can simply say that 2468 has to be a part of multiplication table of 3, but the knowledge that we gain out of it is that it can never be a part of table of 3, right? Similarly, when I talk about Amul, Nestle, ITC, then I can say that these are FMCG companies listed in NSE, but these three companies' financial performance should be analyzed to understand the Indian FMCG sector, right? So they can, simply looking at Amul, Nestle and ITC, I can come to a conclusion these are FMCG companies. But if I have to gain some knowledge out of it, then how can I gain knowledge of these companies? I can only gain knowledge by looking at the finances of this company, right? So this is what is knowledge, right? Finally, when I talk about the highest temperatures in Kolkata, that is 36, 37, 38, so on and so forth, how can this be relevant from a company's point of view? A company basically can determine how many ACs they can sell by using this information. Fine. So you can see that we have collected data. There's certain information that is attached to it, and this information can further be utilized by us for gaining more knowledge, right? So this is basically definition of data, information and knowledge, right? Now this data can be expressed basically in two ways. First one basically can be a numerical data, right? Okay, when I say numerical data, what do I mean? Numerical data simply means data expressed in terms of numbers, right? So anything which is in terms of numbers basically becomes your numerical data, right? For example, if I say the stock price of HUL is 2461 on say 26th of October, so that is basically numerical data, anything which has been shown in terms of numbers, right? Now we come to something called as descriptive data. So data basically is categorized into two. One is numerical data and one is called as descriptive data, right? Descriptive data means what? It will have some more qualitative information in nature, right? For example, if I say any information from a quarter or an annual report of a company to make a judicious investment decision is a kind of descriptive data, right? If I look at the financial information or say financial statements of a company, whatever data I can retrieve from that, or whatever data I can get from that, that will be termed as a descriptive data. Now you would have seen, if you would have seen any of the financial statements, say a quarter report or an annual report, then you would see that the company would tell you what is the vision of the company. So that is more of a descriptive data. So that, for example, if you look at the financial statement and you get to know the vision of the company, that would help you, or you as an investor, to know what exactly company intends to do. So that can help you to take certain information, certain investor decisions which are critical for buying a stock, right? So for example, this is the vision of HUL company. So it says that our vision is to deliver winning performance by being the leader in sustainable business. We will demonstrate how our purpose-led, future-fit business model drives superior performance, delivering consistent, competitive, profitable and responsible growth. So this actually tells you in which direction the company is basically heading to, right? So simply, if they say what is the nature of data, the data can be classified into two parts. One is called as numerical data, that is expressed in terms of numbers, and if it's a descriptive data, it is more of a qualitative information, and eventually it helps to take some kind of judicious investment, right? Okay, then we come to the third type of data. This data basically is a graphical data, right? So something which is represented in form of graph is called as a graphical data. Now how does graphical data helps? Graphical data basically allows you to quickly learn about the nature of process, enables clarity of communication, and provides focus for further analysis, right? So basically it's a mode of communication. I could rather say it contains both numerical as well as a quantitative data, right? Or rather you can say a descriptive data, but it is represented in the form of graph. Like for example, if you look at this particular diagram, you would realize that this is the share price of Hindustan Lever, right? So this share price talks about what? This share price basically indicates a numerical data, right? But you would see this is indicated in the form of a graph. So this will tell you in a period of say 6 months how this graph has actually moved. That means it shows you the movement of the stock price, right? So this basically indicates movement of stock price from say a month of May till October. So you can see there's a lot of movement throughout. So if you want to know that over a period of time how something has performed, right? Or you want to make it more readable in nature, just at a glance, in that case graphical data plays a very important role. So any data which is represented in a picture or a graphic form, that becomes a graphical data, right? So what are the three nature of data that we have read? One is numerical simply means if any data is expressed in terms of numbers, that is called as numerical data. Descriptive data is something which will give you a qualitative information. So the keyword here is basically is a qualitative information, and it also helps you to make a judicious investment decision, right? And finally you have something called as a graphical data. Graphical data is nothing but it will be showcased in the form of a graph, and it basically helps you to it gives you a clarity of communication, and it provides focus for further analysis, right? So moving on, so that's all about that. That's about your first module, that is 8.1. Now when you move to the next module, or rather next sub part of the module, you talk about the types of data in finance and costing, right? Since we all belong to finance background, we need to know how this data in finance or costing can be used so that it is more beneficial from an organization's point of view, right? Okay, now this data in finance and costing basically is divided into two parts. One is quantitative financial data and one is qualitative financial data, right? Quantitative does means what? Simply if any data is expressed in numbers, that becomes a quantitative financial data, right? For example, we saw in the last chapter also stock price of HUL, that is again a quantitative financial data, or any financial statement. For example, if you read any kind of cash flow statement, any profit and loss statement, or a balance sheet, this all becomes your quantitative financial data, right? Moving on, we have something called as a qualitative financial data. So something which appears in a qualitative format, right? So something which is in terms of text or videos or audios, this is all qualitative in nature, right? So quantitative simply means in terms of numbers, and if it is in terms of text or videos or audios, that becomes your qualitative financial data, right? This basically is useful for what? That is, qualitative financial data is useful for what? They are used for financial analysis, right? So if you look at any profit and loss statement or say a balance sheet, that will help you to know the financial position of the company. So in that case, qualitative financial data will play a very pivotal role. Now, for example, if you would see interactions with top level management appearing in various business news channel is a kind of qualitative financial data, since it helps investor to know future prospects of the organization, right? So if you would have seen any kind of business channel, for example, ET Now or say CNBC Awaaz, you would have seen that mostly you would have a top level management people coming, and the interviewers or the host would conduct an interview with them, right? So in that case, they will tell you, for example, if they are going to launch an IPO, right? And they tell you that they are going to raise say 1900 crores of rupees through the IPO proceeds. In that case, they will tell you how do they intend to use these proceeds, where exactly are they going to depute or allocate these funds to. So this is all qualitative financial data. So as an investor, you would get to know whether you should be investing in such company or not, because that will give you a clear understanding of where the management intends to work, right? So it simply means, so simply we can understand that any data used in finance and costing can be basically classified into two. One is quantitative because quantitative automatically means numbers, and if it is qualitative, Again, it helps in making more effective decision making, right? Okay, now this type, there's something called as types of data. Mark this as very, very important. Now this data can be classified as they can be classified into four types, right? One is called as nominal data, one is called as ordinal data, one is called as interval data, and one is called as ratio data, right? Try and remember this in order, because if they ask you what are the different types of data, this is how you are supposed to present in your answer sheet, right? So the first one is nominal data. Now what is nominal data or a nominal scale? Nominal simply means basically your data is categorized based on their characteristics, right? So the first and foremost thing that you should remember in case of nominal scale is basically they are based on your characteristics. What do you mean by characteristics, right? For example, if I take an equity, what is equity? If I take any kind of equity, each equity has a class, right? This class is based on what? This class is basically based on the market cap or the market capitalization. What do you mean by market capitalization? You would all know that market capitalization simply means the number of shares into the price per share, right? So that becomes your market capitalization. So if the company's market capitalization is very huge, right? For example, if we take examples of say bigger companies, for example, you take HDFC or you take example of say SBI, you would see the market capitalization of these companies are very huge. So in that case, they becomes a large cap companies, right? So this is a characteristic of the company. Now similarly, if you see they are relatively smaller companies, as in smaller than the larger companies, in that case, that will called as a mid cap company. And if the companies are very, very small, something which does not carry a huge market capitalization, in that case these company will be called as a small cap companies, right? So basically nominal scale talks about what? It talks about the categorization of data. This categorization is primarily based on the characteristics, and hence that will be called as nominal, right? You can take the example of equity by saying the equity can be categorized on the basis of its market capitalization, that is large, mid and the small cap, right? Okay, now moving on to the second type of data. The second type of data is what? It is called as an ordinal scale, right? What is an ordinal scale? Ordinal scale simply means when you measure variables in natural order, right? Natural order means what? In terms of its rating or ranking. So the keyword here will be rating or ranking. So anything that you do in terms of rating or ranking, you generally tend to follow ordinal scale, or that data is basically used in terms of ordinal scale. For example, if you talk about educational level of any person, it can be a low education level, medium or a high, right? So if you look at a person, if they have studied only till primary level, then that is low. Medium is basically say till class 12, and if they have done their graduation and post graduation, that becomes high, right? So whenever you want to categorize anything in terms of variables of natural order, that is on the basis of their rating or ranking, in that case you are supposed to use the ordinal scale, right? Okay, now we come to the next part, which is called as an interval scale. Okay, what do you mean by interval? Interval simply means that you basically have a standardized gap between two things, yes or no? Then so what does interval data means? Interval data is a type of data that is measured along a scale with each point at an equal distance from the others, right? So there is an equal distance maintained between two types of data, right? Interval data takes numerical values in which the distance between 2 points on a scale is standardized and equal. So remember this is the key word, standardized and equal. If say standardized and equal, then we are talking about the interval scale. Now the best example of equidistant and quantifiable can be a clock, right? You would see that with the gap between the hours will basically be standardized and will be equidistant, quantifiable, and they will be standardized, right? For example, if you look at the needle between 3 and 4 is the same as the difference between 4 and 5, yes or no? So when the R needle is moving, it will move in a very standardized way, right? So the intervals basically between them will be standardized and equal. So that is again a kind of interval scale data, right? So the first one we read was nominal, second is ordinal, third is interval. Finally, we talk about something called as a ratio scale. Now this ratio scale basically has characteristics of all the above three. That means this ratio scale will have characteristics of both all three, that is nominal, ordinal as well as the internal. Okay. Now what does it say? It allows you to categorize and rank your data along equal intervals. Okay. The scale has a true zero and no negative value. So please remember, ratio scale will never have a zero, will never have a negative value. Either it will have true zero or higher than zero. So if you just look at the scale of a ratio scale, you would find 0 onwards, but you would never find it below 0. So that's the categorization of a ratio scale, right? It allows researchers to discover and describe the amount of magnitude involved, right? So what kind of scale are we working on, that you would get to know only through a ratio scale. For example, if you talk about length, money, age, duration, mass, these are all measured on a ratio scale. So you also do realize subsequently these can only be in positive in nature, they can never be negative, right? So that's the quality of ratio scale. And similarly, if you look at the finance, for if say it's a market research questions, so ratio scales are useful when analyzing concepts like sales numbers, market share, customer data and pricing, right? So these are all to be categorized in terms of ratio scales. So what are the four different types of data? Data basically can be nominal, ordinal, interval and ratio. Nominal is basically talks about in terms of its characteristics. Ordinal is basically to do with rating or the ranking. If you talk about the interval scale, we talk about something which is very standardized and equal in nature. And if you talk about ratio scale basically possesses the characteristics of all the above three, that is nominal, ordinal and interval. It will never have a less than zero value. That means it will have a true zero and all the positive values. And basically it allows researchers to discover and describe the amount of magnitude involved, right? Okay, so with this we finish the second part of the module 8, that is 8.2, right? Now we come to the third part of it, that is 8.3. Now we talk about the digitization of data and information, right? Now process of converting of data and information from analog to digital format, right? What do you mean by analog? The simplest example can be that of a watch. Previously we all used to wear the watches which used to have this hour needle and a minute needle, so it used to move and we used to know the time. But nowadays we all have moved to smartwatches. So smartwatches basically are digital in nature. So if you just simply look at it, it will show you the numbers, it will show you the time in terms of numbers. So that becomes a digital format. Now this data may be stored in the form of object, document or an image, yes or no? So any data that you have, how do you store it? You generally tend to store in the form of object or a document or an image, right? Okay, what is this? This is basically a binary data that computers and many devices with computing capacity such as digital cameras and digital hearing aids can process. Binary data, something which in terms of 0 and 1 is called as a binary data. So any data that is stored in the form of binary data in any kind of devices that you are using, in that case, that is basically a digitization of data and information. Now, what is the purpose of digitization? Why do you have to digitize things? See, first thing, it provides widespread access of data and information to large groups simultaneously. So many people can access this information together. Simultaneously means they all can access whatever information is required at the same time, right? And it also helps in preservation of data for a longer period of time. So you basically can preserve this data for a lengthier period of time, right? Okay, the best example of digitization is that of an Aadhaar, right? India has an Aadhaar system or an Aadhaar card. So basically this is all being digitized so that there is an easy access by whosoever want the data, right? Okay. Now, what are the various advantages of digitization? It basically helps in classifying and indexing documents. which helps in retrieval of records. So it basically classifies and index the documents. Records may be accessed by many people simultaneously. That's something we have read before also in the objectives. Similarly, you can add this point in advantages also. You can simply say the records can be accessed by many people at the same time. It's also easier to reuse data, very unlike the analog data, right? So whenever you want, you can take this data out and use it for the purpose required. For example, large maps, data in microfilms, etc. These can all be digitized and it will be very easy for you to use, right? It helps in work processing, right? Any work that you want to process, that plays a very pivotal role in it. Higher integration with business information system. Whatever information system is there, basically you can integrate the data together for easy access. It can be also accessed through multiple locations through network system. So you can be sitting in the different parts of the country or the different part of the world, but if it is digitized, it's very easier for you to use. It also requires very less storage space, right? You don't have to store, you really don't need huge buildings or warehouses to store this. You simply can have a system or a big software or a server wherein you can store the required data, and it eventually helps in increasing the productivity of the organizations, right? So what are the different advantages of digitization? It helps in classifying and indexing documents. It can be accessed by many people simultaneously. If you want, you can reuse the data. It helps in work processing. It also helps you to integrate the business information system. It can be accessed through various multiple locations. It requires less storage space, and finally it helps in increasing the productivity. Okay, now we talk about the process of digitization. How do you digitize or what are the various processes that are involved in the digitization, right? Okay, the first phase is called what do you do in the first phase? You generally tend to justify the proposed digitization project, right? So justification of the proposed digitization project is the first phase as far as the process is concerned. Okay, what do you do in it? Accrual benefits of projects are to be identified as to what benefits in future can be derived from the projects that you can identify, or rather you're supposed to identify that. Now you need to compute basically the cost involved in the project and assessment of available resources. So the first thing is you need to know what are the benefits you can get, but before doing that you also need to know what is the cost involved and what are the resources that's available for you, right? Risk assessment is one more thing that has to be undertaken by you as to what risk does the proposed digitization project carries, and if resources likely to have an early damage may require early digitization, right? Primarily value generation through digitization shall be clearly defined. So you know what you have to define as to what is the value that this project can be, what value this project can actually generate for you, right? So the first point or the first phase for the process of digitization is what? It's basically justification of proposed digitization project. So basically it talks about justification, right? So the keyword here can be J, right? You remember it by justification. Then the second thing you come on to is you basically assess. You basically assess what do you assess? You tend to assess the data that needs to be justified or to be digitized needs to be segregated. That is, it has to be separated on the basis of content and the context. So the keyword here is content and the context, right? Data may be digitized in consolidated format or detailed format. Files, documents, tables to be accessed and evaluated for assessment. Hardware and software requirements also to be assessed. HR requirement for execution of project is also to be planned, right? So basically if you have to assess what all things you should be keeping in mind, you should know on basis of what content and context are you preparing it, right? Whether you want it in a consolidated format or a detailed format, what kind of assessment you need to do in terms of what you have to either maintain files, documents, tables. You also need to recognize whether you need what kind of hardware and software requirements you have, and whatever manpower you will be requiring, that is HR requirement for educational project is to be planned, right? So the second part, that is assessment. You represent this by A, right? So the first one is justification of the proposed digitization project. The second one is assessment, right? Then you come to the third phase, and this third phase is basically planning. Now process requires minute planning. Yes, You need to know in depth as to what you're supposed to do. The several stages are involved in selecting digitization approach, project documentation, resources management, technical specification, risk management, etc. So these are the various tasks you are supposed to undertake when you are planning the process of digitization, right? Now institution may decide to go in-house or can get it through outsourcing agency, right? This can be simply done by in-house people itself if they are competent enough, or if you find you're not competent, or rather you would rather want to go it through an outsourcing agency, you can do that. And it can also be done on demand or in batches. So if you want to do it immediately, right, on tailor-made basis, you can do that, or if you want to do it in bulk, you can again do that. So this all will be a part of your planning, right? Okay, then you come to the fourth phase, and this fourth phase talks about the digitization activities, right? Now there is a historical society called as Wisconsin Historical Society, and they have developed a 6-phase process. Now this process is basically part of your digitization activity, right? The first two activities that you have, or the first two processes, are planning and capture. Okay, now what do you plan and what do you capture? Basically you prepare a schedule, you basically calibrate all the hardware or software. Calibration simply means you streamline, right? And scanning etc is basically done. Then you do a primary quality control. Primary quality control is nothing but you need to check the reliability of the output, right? Then you do editing, right? If there is any kind of cropping or color editing that you're supposed to do, that will be a part of your process. The next step is secondary quality control. Once you have done editing, you have to check the quality of that by selecting random data, and finally you have to store and you have to manage it. So upload to dedicated storage space after doing required file validation, right? So fourth phase talks about the digitization activity. What are the various steps what are the various phases it contains? It contains planning, capture. It talks about the primary quality control and editing, secondary quality control, and storage and management. Although it says 5, I guess you can take it as 6-phase process, and this was defined by Wisconsin Historical Society, right? Then you come to the next phase, which is basically processes in the care of records. The phase in concerned with the administration of records, permission for access of data, intellectual control, classification and upkeep of maintenance of data are few additional requirements for data management, right? So you have to make sure that all the required care is taken as far as the processes are concerned with concern to the records. And finally you have to do the evaluation. So what do you do in evaluation stage? Final stage is determining project's worth and the significance using objective criteria. What is objective criteria? Basically objective criteria means they can be clearly defined or they are quantifiable in nature, right? The main objective is to understand and assist in identifying changes that shall improve digitization process in future, right? So the best way to remember this entire process of digitization, you can remember this as JAP-DAPE, right? Easier way to remember. What does JAP-DAPE stands for? J stands for justification of proposed digitization project. A stands for assessment. P stands for planning. Again, DAPE, you talk about digitization activities. Please remember all the 6 points that I have discussed, right? Then you talk about the processes. P for processes in the care of records, and last one is evaluation, right? So that's all about 8.3 of module 8, right? We come to the last topic for the day. We talk about transformation of data to decision relevant information, right? Okay. To ensure data plays a vital role in making relevant decisions, 6 core steps are followed, right? So if what role does a data plays in making relevant decisions? For example, we'll do it with an example so that it's easy for you to understand. Now supposedly there is a company and there are various departments in the company. Say there is an HR department, there is a sales and distribution department, there is a marketing department, and say there is an IT department, right? Now if you talk about, so for example we are talking about the sales department, right? You can take it for products also, you can take for various departments also, and with the help of example you can understand this very easily, right? Now you intend to sell one of the product in one of the areas, right? You want to know the viability of that. So how would you get to know that? By using data. This data or this data can be utilized by following the 6 steps, right? Now the first thing that you're supposed to do is you have to collect the data, right? For example, if you're supposed to sell a product in a particular area, you need to collect certain data, right? Now how will you collect this data? This can be done through standardized systems. So whatever systems is in place, you can utilize that system to collect the data. For this, you can use appropriate software and hardware. You also need trained staff, right, who will play a very vital role in collection of data and accurate thing. So collection of data basically includes certain things which are or the important parameters. One is you should have standardized systems, you should have appropriate software and hardware, and you should have trained staff to basically conduct the task or basically do the collection of data, right? Now once you have collected all the data about that area, right, then what you do, you basically organize the data, right? Now what does organizing actually means? In organizing simply means that this data should be grouped and they should be arranged in a proper manner to cater to the target users, right? So once you have found the area, you have recognized the area, you have collected the data, so the next thing that you're supposed to do is you basically have to know the target users, right? Now how would you once you find the target users, in that case you would start doing the data processing, right? So whatever data you have collected, now you have organized. How did you organize? By grouping them, arranging them in a proper manner, and once that is being done, you start processing the data. Now data processing, the first thing that you're supposed to do is if there is any unwanted elements, that needs to be eliminated, right? So for example, if you have collected data of say 100 people and 50 of them are not your target users, then the data collected with respect to them has to be eliminated, right? If any substantial thing is missing, that also should be addressed, right? So if anything that you have missed out, that also has to be taken into consideration, and the way you're going to present this data, in that case that format has to be finalized by you, right? So this is the third step. And finally, and the fourth step then you talk about is basically integration of data, right? So first thing that you did was collection, then you organize, then you have processed the data. Now you integrate the data. Integrate means what? You know that the data have come from the various sources, right? So in that case you have to bring it together. So in case if you have to bring it together, how would you bring it together? You would basically create a master server and data network sources, right? So you will have various networks for it. This will enable you to this you can do by using various analytical tools, and this would eventually produce effective and actionable business intelligence, right? Okay, once integration is done, then you are supposed to report the data, right? You have to tell the management as to once you have identified the area, what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to report it back to the management. So how would you report it? Translating data into format to make it accessible to users, right? So basically this data should be in such a way that whosoever is going to read it is able to understand it in a better way, right? So example, in case of financial information, a user shall be able to know the financial position of the company, which is relevant and accurate, right? What is this financial information? He needs to know the various numbers, and what are the various sources of doing that? He can do it through various P&L or say a cash flow statement. So this all becomes a mode of data reporting. And finally you utilize the data, that is data utilization. This is basically the ultimate step. This will help you to enhance the operational efficiency and productivity for the growth of business. This makes corporate decision completely data driven, right? So what are the various steps that you are supposed to follow for transformation of data to for taking adequate or right decisions? First is you collect the data, then you organize the data, then you process it, you integrate it, you do the required reporting, and then finally this data is being utilized, right? So with this we complete the first 4 subparts of module 8. In the next video we would be looking from 8.5 to 8.7, and we would be doing certain objective questions, and with that we would be finishing module 8. Thank you for joining and happy learning.